Hey, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Connection Loop podcast, where we talk with sales leaders, business owners, and entrepreneurs so you can learn and grow. Today, we're super excited to welcome in James Muir. James is an expert in the field of sales, and he's a keynote speaker. He's served in pretty much every role in sales, from individual contributor to executive VP. He is the senior vice president of sales at Unislink in the healthcare space, and he's also founder and CEO of Best Practice International. He's also a best-selling author of 2 books, including the #1 book on closing sales, The Perfect Close. So, James, welcome into the podcast. Welcome,
Rob. It's so great. Thank you for inviting me.
So, right off the bat, I've got to ask a question that's a little afield of this. Guitarist and chemistry fan. That's an interesting combination. So I thought I'd start there. If you can explain yourself, sir, on that.
I'm an accomplished guitarist. There's one behind me right here. That's an exotic travel electroacoustic. It collapses down. But I have 11 guitars, and I am proficient enough that you could play pretty much any song, any style, and all I need to hear is a couple notes, and then boom, I'm in, and I can improvise across anything. And that is, in fact, how I practice. I asked YouTube to give me all of the updated backing tracks in the last week, and my job is to go systematically from top to bottom all the way through the list, and my job is to make sure that solo sounds good. So I just wish I could get paid for that. That would be great. That's a labor of love. So
that's amazing, and you just have a really good ear for it in terms of that. That's amazing.
Yeah, music is a big thing for me. I learned how to do piano, and I can play a little bit of bass too. But guitar is my favorite. And on the chemistry side, all I can tell you, it's a funny story. It's not. I actually mentioned a little bit in Perfect Close, but my son has Crohn's, and when he was really little, we didn't know what he had, and so we were just trying to solve it, right? And when I finally got a diagnosis, which took years, by the way, for us to finally figure out what it was, I went into high gear trying to figure out what it. I got to figure out how to fix this thing, and I discovered in that process that I just love organic chemistry. Absolutely love it. I maybe missed my calling. And so my idea of a good time is on a weekend, just going to YouTube and watch video animations of how the Krebs cycle works. That is totally exciting to me. And I work with doctors all the time. And if I ever ask them a single thing about organic chemistry, their eyes just roll back in their head, because that was the semester or 2 in college that they absolutely hated. But I just find it fascinating. So those are 2 very big hobbies of mine. That's funny that you picked up on that.
Well, putting the notes together in music and putting the chemicals together in science, probably some symmetry there in terms of that.
Left brain, right brain, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, the one thing I always remember from chemistry, see, I was always an art guy, art and, all that kind of stuff, art communication, all that. But the one thing I was pretty good at, though, in basic science was doing titrations, getting the exact color to that nice pink hue. I guess that was my only claim to fame. So,
yeah. Well, they do a titration also in medicine, where we get the drug to the right amount, right? So you'll titrate up or down depending on patients. It's milligrams per kg is what they call it.
No, that's great. So listen, aside from guitar playing, aside from chemistry, sales, you've been in sales for 30 plus years. So talk to the audience a little bit about your roles. I mean, you've seen pretty much everything in the game in terms of where sales has started, how it's evolved, and the different positions you've had over the years. Kind of just bring people up to speed in terms of kind of your story.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've done every role there is, right? From individual contributor to EVP. And that's what I do today. I'm over both sales and marketing. But I'm actually an accidental salesperson. So I started out as an operations person in a family-owned revenue cycle business, right? That's a billing company in the old days. That's what we used to call them. And I used to help the sales reps. So I'd take them out. I'd be the domain expert, and I'd answer the hard questions. And I remember thinking to myself back in those days, man, I hope I never have to do that. That is such a horrible job. And then boom, here I am in it. But we actually acquired another business in another area, and they needed a operations person. So I got there, to go, and I was going to run this place. And I was super excited about running. I had all these ideas, but basically I was a technical person in sales. And anyway, what ended up happening is there was a sales guy in that organization. And at some point he left the company and took about half our customers with him. And my dad, who owns the business, right, he comes to me and he says, James, I need you in sales or we're going to lose this place. like no pressure, right? And
Yeah, I
so,
gotta come through.
oh, and I got to tell you, and so I was so disappointed because I thought I was going to run them. I was going to manage that place, not be a sales guy. And I had just bought a house. I had just bought a new car, all this stuff. And, a bunch of my money was supposed to be coming from commissions. I absolutely sucked at sales at the very beginning. I was absolutely terrible. And I knew all the subject matter perfectly, right?
Yeah.
It was around the closing. And that's actually how I ended up discovering Perfect Close is I ended up asking just accidentally the question that you ask in the Perfect Close. And then I got to thinking about it later. I said, could it really be that easy? Well, I mean, it started working. And I immediately doubted myself, and I thought, no, that it's too simple. It couldn't be it. And then, but I thought, well, I got nothing to lose, and I'm desperate, right? So I just started trying it, and slowly but surely, it worked on everything that I did. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how could I have been, how could I have missed all that? And I got to tell you, I had read every book at that point because I had no mentors.
Yeah.
I had read every book on selling I could think of, but all the sales, I don't want to say all. If you were to go out and search on the internet on how to close sales, like literally 90 to 95% of them are all going to be very dysfunctional, manipulative tactic. And that's not what Perfect Close is. And by the way, the data is back, and they're not very successful anyway. Those techniques don't work.
Sure. I would say, from what works in sales and what doesn't, right? So what have you seen, especially recently, the last, maybe, I don't know, take the last 5 years, 5, 10 years, maybe 5 years, the tools and books that have made a difference for you? When you say tools, what are some tools in sales that everyone out there should be utilizing? And then from a book's perspective, obviously the ones you've written have been fantastically well received and done well, but also from your perspective, like what should they have in their tool belt for books and tools?
All right, well, let me do that backwards. So I think getting your head straight is probably the single most important thing before we talk about sales things. So I would recommend some books like Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. Absolutely classic book. Every person should read it, and maybe even read it once a year. And that's also to get your intent in the right place, right? If your intent's in the right place, the customers can detect that you genuinely want to help them. And so instead of feeling techniqued, they'll recognize that you're genuinely trying to serve them. And if you do that, you could screw up a million times and they'll still keep coming back to you because they recognize that you're being genuine, you're authentically being present with them and all that. So that would be my first recommendation on that. And then as far as books go, again, another classic book called Consultative Selling by Matt Cannon. He's passed away now, but an absolutely phenomenal book, one of the best of all time. I think it's in its 9th edition now. And so I would recommend that. But what you'll learn in that book is that when executive buyers, okay, so this is not short-term sales cycles that can happen in a single setting, but in more complex sales, which is what I do. He'll teach you about muchness, soonness, and sureness. And so muchness, these are the things that any executive, when they're trying to compare options, when they evaluate something, they're going to figure out what to spend their money on. And a really big outfit can spend their money on a lot of things. And it might be things in your category, but it also might be things outside of your category. And so you might be competing, like at a hospital, it might be competing with a service or technology, but you might be competing with money that's going to go to build a whole new wing on the hospital. And so you can use these 3 things that Matt Cannon teaches in that book to compare any 2 dissimilar competitive offerings, we'll say. And so real briefly, muchness is how much of a return am I going to get? Okay. Soonness is how soon do I get my return, and certain, or sureness is how certain I'm going to get the return. Using that, you can take really very lopsided things. And so even if you don't win the muchness game, right? Yeah. For example, let's say I'm competing with putting a whole new wing on a hospital. Yep. Well, I can't win the muchness game, but I can definitely win the soonness game. Right. And so I can hey, well, mine starts delivering and putting you in the black right away, whereas that wing is not going to produce money for you for 3 years, 2 years, whenever you get done with your project. And then there's the certainty. Is it possible that moonshot project could go wrong and you lose money on it? Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so if you can do things like guarantees and things like that to increase the sureness part of it. But if you use that, you can appeal to executive buyers. And so I learned that from that book. And another book that I would recommend, just to throw it in there, is Mahan Khalsa's book called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. Absolutely phenomenal book. And it is, in my opinion, the high watermark for discovery, the discovery process when you're in the middle of the sale. Once you've got it engaged and now you're going to run the discovery process, I think that is about as good as you can do in that book. So those are some books. In terms of things I've learned or things that work, what I would say is, in the olden days, we used to ask the customers to take time to tell us about themselves.
Sure.
And the market won't do that anymore. They won't tolerate it. What they want you to do is already know about them when you come and you visit them. And so rather than asking them for something like time, what I would recommend, and has worked extremely well for me, is to offer them something instead. And so I think I'm in large, complex healthcare sales. And so what we offer is we offer an assessment. And that assessment is worth thousands of dollars, very often $10,000, $20,000 to do the kind of assessment that we do. It requires that we pull data from a system and do an analysis on it. It takes us some days to put it all together, and then we deliver it back to them as a deliverable. And I do all of that at no charge, even though there's quite an expense. But that makes the process of working with me inherently valuable, right? So I'm giving before I'm getting.
Right.
But the nice thing is the delivery of that assessment ends up differentiating me in such a way that it literally destroys our competition. If they'll let me do the assessment, we'll win about 80% of the time. So that is the thing that I think, like, if you read all the books from the 60s, all the way through the 80s and even 90s, it's all about trying to convince the customer, persuading them and all that. And really all of that has, everybody's gone through it. They recognize all those techniques and all that stuff. What you need to do now is just offer something that's genuinely valuable to them, so they'll engage with you, that also allows you to prove your quality to them at the same time. So that's worked very well for us.
Yeah, and that's offering value and solutions and understanding is way better than pressuring and manipulation. And everyone is so much more well informed to a certain degree in terms of information now than a long time ago. If someone had called you and you weren't familiar with a lot of that information, now you can do a lot of research, especially when a meeting is set up. So it's, on the buyer and the seller side, there is a lot of information exchange that can be done way before the meeting even happens. So being 100%. Able to come there, and have a solution and say, look, if you provide this, we'll provide this, and then we'll talk about this. So I think a lot of people really appreciate that, especially in the big moving numbers that you're dealing with in healthcare.
Yeah, I think maybe just to add a little bit to what you said is it's more than just cursory information. For example, just knowing the company's revenues or something like that. You need to know a little bit about the domain that they're in, because that's the thing that sets you apart. Like, if because they're this kind of business, they have these 3 unique things that are unique to them. That will let you say, either ask a question, hey, what do you guys do when you encounter these 3 things? And they're like, oh, wow, that guy's clued in. He understands what we're like, right? Or you could do it the other way, where you're seeding the thinking and you're saying, hey, other clients of ours that are your specialty or whatever it is, we end up seeing issues here and here and here. And then what are you guys seeing? So you're using that as a seed to get the conversation going around these challenge areas. But it does 2 things. It qualifies you, right? So just by the nature of the question they ask, they know that you know about their business. And the second thing is, because it's a question, now they're going to feed you back a bunch of valuable information. If you'll just listen, your customers will tell you what the target is that you have to hit in order to win. And so very much so, I think that the discovery process is probably the most important process in the wholesale cycle.
If you're not providing, like you said, those seeds of hinting when you're asking the question that shows that you know what you're talking about, then when you ask a question in general, they're not going to be able to give you anything, because they're going to feel, oh, you don't even understand what I do. So you're going to get short answers. They won't even be opened up. So that's a really good strategy.
Yeah, the litmus test to use is the thing that you're asking something you could have gotten online before you got there. If that's true, you probably don't want to be asking that question, because there's no value in it for the customer. But if you ask a much more difficult question, like, hey, when you're measuring your priorities between this challenge and this challenge, how are you guys going to end up making your decision about which one's most important? Dang, that's a hard question, right? And they're going to have to cognate on it for a minute. And so you got to just let them have time. Let them have time to think through that process, because probably no one's ever asked them a question like that before. And if you
Yeah.
do that a few times, not only will you get really valuable information about how to run your sales and your process and how to create value
Yeah.
from the customer, but it qualifies you, right? They realize that you're an expert worth working with.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know if you remember the term. I think we've all heard it before. The marketing term that I think HubSpot came up with years
Sure.
ago. Sales and marketing, right? They're doing this thing. They're coming together. So, from your experience, what's that relationship look like today in terms of sales and marketing? Where's like the commonality kind of between the two and the differences?
Well, one thing that's hugely different than years ago is, of course, every salesperson is their own brand,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
So you need to manage your presence on LinkedIn and whatever other channels that your market tends to gravitate towards.
Yep.
And that will give you a sort of a mini broadcast way of people
Mhm.
getting exposure to you, your brand, your personal brand, but also your company's brand. So I mean, there's a lot of things that have changed. The tools have definitely changed. The technology has changed, but that's the one thing is before you pretty much used to rely on the company for everything. And now each individual person is their own brand. And so
Yeah.
you have to pay attention to that as a sales professional and think about, well, what kind of brand am I trying to convey? What do I want? What when people bump into me, what kind of experience do I want them to have?
Sure.
And that's going to drive you to try to create quality content,
Hmm.
which is good. You need to know your domain well enough to be able to share some good quality content that's valuable.
Yeah, and the personal has very much become the professional in a lot of ways. People like when you have your profiles online, and even within the guidelines of branding with companies you work for, if you have your own company, there is that essence of people want to get to know the person, because there is that crossover too with social media and sales in terms of I want to know that person, I want to know that company, what do they stand for, what do they do, all that kind of stuff that happens out
I
there.
would take it even one step further in saying that you need to make it personal,
Hmm.
because people don't want to work with just a corporate machine
Hmm.
anymore. That's like a very negative thing.
Yeah,
So as you're working through all the normal stuff that you do with them on a professional level, you can still be human, right? You
yeah,
can still
yeah,
tell them about and you'll find many, many opportunities and how you can relate to people, because we're all humans. And so we all have very similar things. And so if you just let something, like one of my sales guys just moved into a new house.
yeah,
And so he just mentions it, and then suddenly there's a mini conversation about how terrible it is to move into a new house and all the challenges, and then what they did. And you're like, wow, look at this! All he had to do was say that, and then this whole rapport is generated within 2 or 3 minutes, because everybody's had that experience, right?
yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a mistake not to be human. If you try to be overly professional and not share the human side of who you are, you're really leaving some uh, impact on the table.
Well, you couldn't have segued this topic any better for the next part, because you mentioned machine, corporate machine, and you mentioned humanity, human. So AI, I'm sure you've heard of it, James, and AI and its impact in sales. We always ask everyone on here, especially recently, because there's been so many fast developments with AI, how it's affecting different sectors, different businesses, how it's being forecasted. So for you, what's kind of your take on AI and its impact in sales? What do you see currently, and where do you kind of see it going?
Yeah, it's so pervasive. It's a good thing you mentioned it's a sales, but so we use it. Obviously, we have several different tools, but I use it in the most generic sense. So and not to plug any, my favorite AI engine is Perplexity right now. Although it's all a moving target, so there's all different ones. But for what I do in terms of medical information and instructions on how to do certain things, I get way less hallucinating from Perplexity than I do from others, and that's pretty important. If just due to the nature of the way AI is, it can very much help you. We'll just say if you're like a bottom performer and
Mhm.
you need a middle to better than average email or copy on something, it can save massive amounts of time.
Right.
I've used it very heavily over the last couple of months to create policies and procedures manuals for certain clients as favors to them, right?
Yeah.
And so I could go through the steps, but anyway, it's helping me come up with most of that. And then I use my own personal smarts to know whether the computer has done a good job and if it's missed anything. And I just change my questions suitably to do that. But
Yeah.
so it's a big time saver. Of course, there is some risk with
Mhm.
AI, and that is if you start asking for certain industries statistics and things like that.
Mhm.
I would say you better do your homework and make sure that you check what the values are that the computer is giving you, because it's quite possible that it's hallucinating And if you ask it to give you data, it will give you data even if that data is not accurate, and that could ruin your credibility if you're not careful. So while it is a time saver, I would say trust but verify.
Good way to put it. Good way to
Yeah.
put it. Yep. Trust but verify. And like you said, with what you do, you need the data, and the data has to be correct data. Otherwise, you can't do what you're supposed to do. So there's got to be, credibility with that. How about as far as sales strategy? Everyone always loves to know, especially currently, we've all had to pivot so much. A lot of things are evolving so quickly, like we just talked about. But what has been your most effective sales strategy within the past year, 24, 25? What have you kind of seen that's worked pretty well?
Let's see if we have made a change. The truth is, the strategy I just gave you has helped me for many years, where you give before you get.
Right. Yep.
Most people have not caught on to that, and they're willing to give a little, but there's sort of this thing that tells you not to give a lot, and yet it probably depends to some degree on the size of each sale that you do, whether or not you can give a little or whether you give a lot. But for the size of sales that I work, I can give quite a lot and still have it work out. And so I would not be afraid of giving as much as you possibly can. I think you'll be surprised because, like I said, it differentiates you. And then if they didn't get that kind of experience from your competitor, it makes them want to work with you. And so of all the strategies, even though that one is not in the last 12 months, the way we've implemented it in the last 12 months maybe has changed a little bit. But the strategy itself is not really all that new. It's give before you get. And the more you give, the more likely you are to get. So it does create a reciprocity debt. But the other thing it does is it creates genuine value for the customer before you start. And so I don't want you to think about what I just said there as manipulation, because that's not what it is. Really more about you giving and showing that you can deliver good work before you've ever done any work with them. And if you're doing the kind of work that requires a really big investment, then it's a very safe way for them to try you out, because you're not going to charge for that, right? So, or you might charge a little. We'll just say, every business will be a little bit different, but that strategy in and of itself, I will just tell you, I'm trying. We do hundreds of these assessments that I was just telling you about every year, and I don't think there's been a single time since the beginning of 2024 that another company has done an assessment, not once. So if you decide to give before you get, you are immediately put into rarefied air. It'll just set you completely apart. So what the audience might be thinking is, yeah, but James, how do I, what do I give? What do I give? And what I would say is, you need to master your domain well enough that you have something to give. So that's just hard work, guys. So master the domain that you're in, and where that domain intersects with your sales skills, boom, that's where value is created. And you can really, once you've learned how to do that and you can repeat it over and over and over again, you will be very, very successful.
Yeah. And, stand out, like you said, especially in the field that you're in compared to your competitors. So that's a great piece of advice. And it's working, like you said, tried and true, just the delivery of it, but it's been the same values for a long time. What about as far as learning? One of the favorite questions we love to ask everybody: what's the most important thing you learned this past year? And you can take it from any stratosphere you'd like. Like what's kind of been a learning? You can pull it from anywhere. You got free range on this one, James.
All right. Well, so I it's not the first time I've been over marketing, but I am over both marketing and sales. So I'll tell you something I learned from a sales perspective that might surprise salespeople, or even people that sell marketing services, is that as a marketer, if you're doing your job, then you will reduce everything that you do, all the channels that you could use to generate opportunities. You're going to reduce them down to a cost to acquire. Okay, so you got to think, okay, it costs me this much money to put a Google ad out, or it costs me this much money to attend a trade show, or it costs me this much money to do a webinar. And then what's my reach, right? So how many people I'm going to influence? How many leads is that going to generate? That doesn't mean you're going to close them. Many people would stop right there, but what you need to do is you need to apply your close ratio to those leads, right? So let's just say it's costing me $100 per lead, and then our close ratio is 33%. Then great, my cost to acquire is going to be about $300. So, and it's different for each business. So your cost to acquire will be different. But in my business, I can afford to pay $5,000 to $10,000 to get a customer, and it'll still work out for me. And so when you're planning what channels you're going to use, and each salesperson has their own mini set of channels, right? We can cold call, we can do emails, we can use video. There's all these different things that we can do. We want to think about what is my conversion going to be on those, and what's my ultimate cost to acquire, and that would include your time. If you're just if you're an individual contributor, it's your cost. You got to think about your time and how you're allocating it. But anyway, that if you are ruthless about that, then what you'll do is you'll realize, oh, okay, I'm going to run multiple horses here, and I'm going to figure out which one is delivering the best and which one is delivering the worst, and then you're going to top grade. So the low guy on the totem pole gets rotated out. We're not going to use that channel anymore. And the one that's performing well, we're going to double down and we're going to put more into that one. And then you're going to add a new one and you're going to test it and you're going to see how it fits in the mix. And you keep doing that with your portfolio of opportunities. So I have taken that to a whole new level in the last year. And it is every salesperson's fantasy to not have to cold call, right? To not have to do any prospecting at all. And if your sales machine, or I should say your marketing machine, will do what I have told you, you'll get to the point where you'll end up with more opportunities coming in than your salespeople have time to handle. And that's a very good place to be, because then if you need to, you can hire more salespeople. And then that puts the company in a very scalable position, right, where you can grow because you've got enough opportunities. It's usually when you don't have enough opportunities that companies struggle with growth. Yeah, no, very true. What are the last words of wisdom you want to put out there into the world, James, before we go? What's some good piece of advice you want to give everybody? Let's see here. Well, you know what, man, there's so many. I would just echo that something that's in perfect close, which is that your intent matters more than your technique does. As long as the customer understands and detects that you're genuinely trying to serve them, then you don't have to worry too much. You can mess up the technique, and they'll still let you come back. But on the other hand, if the customer detects that you're doing something self-serving, or you're trying to manipulate them, or you're trying to technique them, then in most cases, what the data says is that this shows off. So what you should do is go into any situation that you're with a customer and think, hey, what's the best way that I can serve this person right now? And do that. It might involve you, it might not, right? But be present with them in that moment and think, hey, how can I help these guys? How can I make this going to be the biggest success that they could be for them? Hopefully it does involve you, right? But if it doesn't, do the best you can. I could tell you, I'll tell you one crazy story. So I went to a clinic in Phoenix, Arizona, and I was selling software at the time. And she liked the software, everything was great, but honestly, our software was overkill for what this clinic needed. And so I actually recommended 2 other competitors to this practice administrator. And I walked out of there, and I won't lie, there was this moment I'm thinking, man, am I doing something stupid here? I mean, I really could have probably got that deal. Right. And but anyway, it was the right thing to do. Okay, so I did that, and I never expected to hear from that administrator again. And then now fast forward, I have a client in the Phoenix market, is the largest hospital system there. So anybody in Phoenix is going to know exactly who I'm talking about right now. And I'm talking to their CIO, and I said, and by the way, this was a huge customer of ours. It was a $20 million customer, and meaning that's the sales that we got from these guys. And I asked him, Glenn, I said, hey, what made you call us to begin with? I never knew how you found out about our name or anything. And it turned out it was this administrator that years earlier I had turned on to 2 other competitors of mine and never sold. She's the one that recommended to Glenn Edwards that he should contact us. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna say. You can call that karma, you can call it whatever you want. I did not try to help that administrator because I was hoping that this big hospital system was going to refer somebody to me later. That's not why I did it. I did it because it was the right thing to do. And guys, you'll do that in every situation. I promise you. That deal, it turned out to be nothing for me, ended up turning into a $20 million, much bigger deal. One of the biggest deal we ever got, actually, at my company at that time. So anyway, that's my message. Intent matters more than technique. That'll take you a long way, and I promise you'll find much, much more joy in your selling if you live your sales life that way, day in and day out. The karmic sales cycle, it came all the way around to that deal at the end. It did. I don't like it. Is the wildest thing I can think of. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. This person that I didn't even sell referred.
Yeah,
this.
but like you said, you did the right thing though. Your instincts, you knew it was right, and said, you know what, this is the way you should go. And people, no matter what industry you're in, I think people appreciate that big time. And obviously, she did. So
yeah, you need to be in the sales career for the long haul, though, right? I mean, she didn't refer these guys to me,
right.
The next day. It
Right.
happened years later. But man, did it pay off? So anyway, just a lesson that time.
Yeah. But James, thank you so much for showing up today and delivering some great nuggets for everyone out there. You've had just a really great background in sales, and you're handling marketing as well, and you have everything, your books. I mean, you're doing a bunch of stuff, but I think, the takeaway for a lot of people here today is, your intentions. What are your intentions? And that will ride you through. But James, thank you so much for showing up, dropping the knowledge. It was great to have you on.
Rob, thanks for having me. I'll come back anytime.
Sounds awesome. We'd love to have you back. Bye, everybody.